1981 began with the swearing in of President Ronald Reagan.
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Just a few months later, his attempted assassination delayed the Oscars, shining a light on Jodie Foster, who the assailant hoped to impress. The first DeLorean hit the streets, hoping to be the car of the future. And MTV launched, making music videos the hot new trend. Raiders of the Lost Ark proved Spielberg and Lucas were the new kings of blockbuster filmmaking. But On Golden Pond reminded audiences of the power that old Hollywood commanded on screen. Blowout and Mommy Dearest revealed some of the most interesting stories happening off-screen, while comedies like Arthur and Cannonball Run scored with audiences. And the Canadian tax shelter era produced hits like My Bloody Valentine, Scanners, and Porky's.
1981 is a year in film where you see a lot of politics and cinema match up kind of accidentally. Reagan was obviously all about this kind of nostalgia for an imagined past. And at the same time, you saw a lot of 1970s directors finally getting the freedom to do what they wanted, which was really to go back to the films of their youth and create what they considered better versions. In a lot of ways, Raiders of the Lost Ark really kicks off the big 80s blockbusters. This is kind of the movie that New Hollywood really wanted to make.
If Jaws and Star Wars invented the summer movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark perfected the summer movie. This is an entertainment machine. There is not a shot, there is not a moment in this film that isn't thrilling, fun. The very DNA and structure of this movie is just perfect.
I mean, it's famous that Spielberg and Lucas wanted to make a really cool, up-to-date version of those old adventure serials that they loved watching on TV when they were young. Crucially, it was not a revisionist movie. It was a high-tech version of those kinds of movies.
When it comes to really technical filmmaking, a lot of people point out that Spielberg is incredibly good at staging a scene and blocking a scene, kind of placing things in the frame. And I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is kind of the best example of this. You can take any shot out and look at it, and he's doing so much in every single frame.
Holy smoke, my friends! I'm so pleased you're not dead! Indy, we have no time. If you still want the Ark, it is being loaded onto a truck for Cairo.
He went way over his days, he spent way too much money, but I mean, it's all up there on screen, that kind of passion, the love for the material, in a way that kind of revitalized an entire adventure genre.
You can tell that Spielberg was really concerned about getting Raiders of the Lost Ark right, and he didn't want to take any risks. In traveling to set, he packed his own food, and that meant when the cast and crew were suffering from horrible food poisoning, he was fine because he had only eaten SpaghettiOs all month.
Basically, they were like, we can't shoot this big action scene that we were gonna shoot with this guy with a scimitar, and Harrison Ford is like, can I just shoot him? And that's one of the most iconic moments of the series, and I think one of the most defining moments of Indiana Jones as a character.
It felt like in 1981, certain directors were kind of rewriting the rule book on visual style. And two directors who definitely did that with their films were Michael Mann and Brian De Palma. Brian De Palma had his choice of projects after Dress to Kill, but in the end he decided to write his own film, and that was Blowout. Blowout did nothing at the box office. It did very little with critics. It was way too ahead of its time. Now it's considered one of the pinnacles of early 80s filmmaking. It's one of the pinnacles in political thrillers. It's a fantastic film that everyone loves, but in 81, no one cared.
Blowout is Brian De Palma's most stylish movie. It's absolutely gorgeous. I could go back to it over and over again. And I think that's also because it's one of his most playful, visually and aurally. It's really just playing with the idea of what is filmmaking, how do we affect people, what do we do?
I think a really fantastic scene that lays out De Palma's directorial eye is the scene on the bridge where John Travolta, with his directional microphone, is kind of listening to the world around him.
One of the most exciting visual elements of Blowout is Vilmos Zsigmond working with a Steadicam for the first time. He's playing around with it a lot. You see some great shots, obviously the famous spinning shot. You're just kind of trying new visuals with this new mode, and everyone on set is excited about it.
This is a signature Brian De Palma film in how he ratchets up the tension. We can see an audience being led down a very confusing sort of plot that is shown in a way that allows you to follow it.
Blowout feels incredibly timely today because it really captures this idea of sort of paranoia, of not trusting anyone, including your neighbors, and all of that element of, you know, we can't trust authority, we can't trust each other, we can't even trust our own eyes and ears, is percolating through this movie.
There's echoes of Kennedy, there's echoes of Watergate, there's echoes of Ted Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. I mean, De Palma is doing all of this, and it's like he's doing it pretty much effortlessly.
Interesting things are constantly happening all around us, and De Palma is merely sort of guiding us to look at the right place at the right time to see things that are so phenomenal and outside of the ordinary.
Michael Mann was coming off of a relatively successful television career when he directed Thief, and you get this sense that he was just kind of pent up and ready to go when he gets his first feature film.
All of the elements that he would use and kind of, you know, tweak and perfect later in his career, it's all there. The Tangerine Dream music, the neon lights bouncing off of rain puddles on the ground. It's just so distinctly Michael Mann.
Michael Mann is often associated, I think, when it comes to heist films. Heat is the one that most people want to talk about. It's wonderful, it's a nice cat and mouse game. I would say, though, I actually think Thief is his stronger heist movie. Even the opening scenes, I find that really sets the tone that this is going to be a noir film, but not the noir film of old Hollywood. This is a noir film for, you know, a new time and a new decade and a new director.
At its heart, Thief is really a heist movie, but it has a lot to say about the lack of upward mobility. It is showing that no matter how much money and success James Caan gets, there is still a system around him that will oppress him.
Michael Mann has joked that the only people who realized that he was making a sort of left-wing labor allegory in Thief were the French. Just the French critics sort of understood that this was a film about, you know, labor and exploitation.
You do what I say. I run you. There is no discussion. I want you work until you are burned out, you are busted, or you're dead. You'll get it. You got responsibilities.
The thing you need to know about Michael Mann is he only makes one kind of movie, and it's the movie where the guy is the best at the thing he does and everyone else keeps telling him how good he is. And he built this incredible kind of neon cool aesthetic to showcase it. Like, everybody remembers the welding torch and the goggles, but the whole movie feels like that. The whole movie has this sinewy, sizzling sensuality.
There's something about it that just screams this particular time, that early 80s, that dark vibe. There was nothing else quite like it, but was also incredibly prescient in that we saw so many others trying to imitate what we saw in Thief, but in Thief, we came upon it naturally.
Not all of the memorable films of 1981 started off with the best reputation. And in fact, one of the movies that people considered Hollywood's worst has really outlived a lot of awards winners.
John Waters described Mommy Dearest as the only successful child abuse comedy ever made. It is a real nightmare depiction of film star Joan Crawford by Faye Dunaway, sort of celebrated as this kind of camp character assassination of this great Hollywood star, and it has become one of the great disaster pieces of cult cinema because of it.
Frank Perry is really hearkening back to this old style of melodrama, the kind of movies that Joan Crawford would star in. It's this kind of unusual, gauzy, and heightened filmmaking style. It took about 20 years for people to kind of look back on that style and go, oh, there was something there.
It's this movie about abuse, but it's incredibly funny and emotionally affecting and really unpredictable and really I think, uncomfortable ways because of the camp factor.
No wire hangers! What's wire hangers doing in this closet when I told you no wire hangers ever?
The film is based on a book by Joan Crawford's daughter, and the information inside was kind of highly contested about how much of it was real or not in terms of Joan Crawford's treatment of her children.
It is a truth that almost every side of it has said has been inflated. So it's very hard to know where the reality of Christina and Joan's relationship is in relation to this movie.
Faye Dunaway's performance as Joan Crawford is committed. She believes every moment of pathos of Joan's struggle. She believes the anger she feels towards her daughter, towards the men trying to take her business, towards her fading star. You see her clutch that agony.
Work till I'm half dead, and I hear people saying she's getting old. What do I get?
You know, a lot of people get hit in this movie. Little Christina gets whacked with wire hangers, and older Christina gets slapped repeatedly, and the actress has said that those were real slaps. It was a dangerous little film.
There's a bit of debate, as there always is with films that turn out like Mommy Dearest to be cult classics, how much of it was intentional and how much of it was just the strange alchemy of creative forces that came together every day on set. And I don't think we're ever really going to know.
I think if you were an outsider to Canada in 1981, you might have watched our films and thought we are depraved. Between Porky's and its sexuality or My Bloody Valentine and its explicit violence, you could kind of make an argument that something was very wrong in Canada.
Someone who did not invent genres, but I think really made a bunch of definitive versions of genres is Bob Clark, and we don't talk about that nearly often enough.
Bob Clark was only really able to make Porky's because right before he made a movie, Tribute, which got Jack Lemmon an Oscar nomination. He used that clout to finally convince people to make this over-the-top sex comedy, and in fact, people still pulled out halfway through. He needed to use the tax shelter and his own money to keep the film shoot afloat.
It is technically Canadian under the beautiful tax shelter era. It is, of course, entirely filmed in Florida, but features iconic Canadian actors. Art Hindle, who is one of my absolute favorites. He's great in this as the cop.
It's this idea of beta males sort of, not just getting the girl, but sort of getting the girl in really like dominant, power-driven, leering, perverse kind of ways. But there's a sweetness to the way that Bob Clark directs it, where all those sort of vengeful power fantasies sort of, fall away. And it really is more a movie about sensations and feelings and discontents of adolescence.
The most seminal scene in the film, for lack of a better word, is probably the shower scene where the boys are looking in at the girls showering. There's something so interesting about the scene because it's not just the boys that are horny, it's that the girls on the other side, they're getting excited too, and they're getting up in arms, and they get to be contributors to the scene as well.
These women are equally as horny as the men are, and it's one of the few sex comedies that doesn't portray women as scared, frightened animals that need to be tricked. And that's not what's happening here. They give as good as they get.
Hey, Predator, Pee-wee's with you. You better cover his eyes. He might get confused.
It is this kind of bittersweet, nostalgic movie about being a teenager in the 50s.
People forget that Porky's is actually a period piece. I don't know if he imbues it with that enough to, rise above the sex comedy trappings, but it's there.
No pun intended, but there's a special place in my heart for My Bloody Valentine. First of all, it's Canadian, and unabashedly so. It feels so intrinsically Maritimes Canada to me. Moosehead is in, I think, most of the scenes, probably more than the rest of the actors, but also the landscape, it's Cape Breton, and it looks like Cape Breton.
The Sydney Mine is really the star of My Bloody Valentine. It is such an interesting location, and the town around it feels so authentic and lived in.
The mines really are this whole other character unto itself. Mines are scary places. They're dark. It's not fun. I really think this movie has so much more atmosphere and grit than I think it really has any right to, considering it was just like a tax shelter cheapie.
The mine itself is just one of the most amazing set pieces, and the climactic scene where everything's tumbling down and the miners just like giggling and repeating, "My Bloody Valentine." It's so unsettling and it really stays with you.
Sarah, be my bloody Valentine.
What really makes it work is there's a lot of thoughtful energy put into the characters. It's one of the only slashers that I can think of that has a love triangle that isn't just romantic, but feels romantically complex. And I feel like there's not enough slashers that are really putting that much work into the characters in it that make it so complex, and you get invested in their lives and their journey and their struggle. And when people do get killed, it's a lot more emotional.
You're watching a bunch of people who have already graduated from high school, they're young people, they're doing a generational job, which we know very soon is not going to exist anymore, and they're just trying to have as good a time as possible as they kind of get picked off one by one. Yes, most of them are disposable, but you actually like these people. You like spending time with them. So when they die in, horrific ways, the deaths in here are absolutely wild. They actually had to get toned down for their rating. You actually care about these people.
Harry Warden, I think, is an underrated slasher icon. His whole getup, very scary, very intimidating, and the breathing that happens with the mask. It's terrifying. I think he should be up there with Freddy and Jason and Chucky and all of them.
I feel like Valentine's Day doesn't get enough love in horror movies, and My Bloody Valentine solves that dilemma. This film is full of amazing kills, amazing locations. It's certainly a slasher film with a lot of heart.
In 1981, you saw a lot of technical advances in special effects, and these really came through in the horror films of the 80s that increasingly had a lot of weird body transformations. And you see that in 3 films: Scanners, Possession, and An American Werewolf in London.
David Cronenberg's Scanners was a film that I think was his attempt to be slightly more accessible in the type of horror he was approaching. It almost takes a more standard 80s slasher approach, but through psychokinesis.
Scanners is one of David Cronenberg's funnest films. It has a lot of elements of the body horror. There's also the science fiction, this sort of corporate espionage with this, pharmaceutical company.
At the end of the 1950s, there was a pregnancy drug called thalidomide that resulted in a whole bunch of birth defects. It was a huge controversy, and Scanners kind of lifts that for part of its plot. We're told that scanners are caused when pregnant mothers have taken a certain drug, and that's causing them to have these children that have psychic powers.
Considering that David Cronenberg is very well known for the body horror, and this is the film that really brings body horror to the mainstream, I actually found this film to be a lot more tame than his previous ones. It's just really that one scene, that one headshot scene that is the most body horrific of all of them. Michael Ironside, I think, is one of the most underrated character actors that we have. Every single time, he doesn't miss. Any performance he puts through, he is exactly as villainous as you need him to be, or scaled back as you need him to be. There is a menace to him.
You don't know nothing, do you? You want to see if I get in? Anyway, you want to see if I get in?
I have this tight 5 about David Cronenberg's science fiction movies, which is that he always predicts the future and he never gets it right, but he finds a way to make it credible. Like the science in Scanners is laughably wrong, like just the way he thinks computers will work, but it's coming from a place so grounded that you can almost believe you're watching an alternate future.
Andrei Zhulavsky's Possession is kind of a famously weird movie, but at the same time, I think it's a movie that really provokes a response from everyone. Everyone kind of connects with it, whether they're repulsed or love it.
It's hard to really talk about what Possession is about, but the closest I can come is to thinking about a divided state. At the time that this was being made, Zhulavsky was persona non grata in his home country of Poland, and he was working mostly in France.
One of the wildest things about Possession, about a movie where a woman is sleeping with a squid creature, is Zhulavsky considers it his most autobiographical film. And there are full scenes pulled from his life. It was first inspired by his own divorce when he found his child neglected and covered in jam. And as you can see, that scene is literally in the movie. So as much as this is a weird, surreal film, he has multiple scenes pulled from his real life.
What happened? It's Daddy.
Mummy said she would be right back, but she never came. Then Margie called and told me to be brave.
You can tell Andrei Zhulavsky has really intense relationships himself and has had awful, damaging breakups. It's not only in the story he's telling, it's not only in the agitation that is just filled in every scene, in the air, in their souls, in their rage. It's just the agitation that's in the editing. It's the agitation that's in the overall style and the way he tells his story.
The look in Isabelle Adjani's eyes will never leave your brain after you watch Possession. This is a performance that is haunting. She is frightening. She reaches operatic levels of hysteria, but never crosses over into being silly.
Psychologically, you watch that film and you feel in the headspace of the characters. The entire production, from the design to the performances to the effects, creates an unease that very few movies can match. And I think it has a lot to do with the fever pitch it's willing to go and hit again and again.
I don't know what was going on with 1981, but there was a lot of werewolf movies. There was The Howling, An American Werewolf in London, as well as Wolfen.
An American Werewolf in London is my favorite horror comedy, and it's because it's actually a horror comedy. This movie makes me laugh so hard, but it's also so scary in parts.
One thing I really admire about An American Werewolf in London is its dreamlike quality. About half of the film, you have the main character in like a coma, having these weird nightmares, but they work really well and it makes the film a little more unsettling overall.
One of my earliest cinematic memories is the Nazi werewolf dream sequence. It comes in so abrupt, so fast, and just so hard. I remember not knowing, my brain couldn't process how it went from here to here this quickly. It's such an effective moment, and I don't know that John Landis has ever successfully crafted something that effective before or after.
All right already.
That scene is so effective because it sets it up as it's such a fun film.
A lot has been said about the special effects sequence of David Naughton transforming into the werewolf for the first time. What I love is the camera work, because we get these shots then of a Mickey Mouse figure, we see a Godzilla poster in the background. It's really doing a lot with the kind of accoutrement of this room.
Have you ever thought about how cool it would be to turn into a werewolf? It's not. It's very painful. This transformation scene goes on forever. You're seeing, like, it's almost like he's being born. The snout comes right out of his mouth. It's just like, oh God, no, this poor guy. Somebody help this guy.
That transformation scene took 6 days to shoot, and I was in the floor, for a period of time. I couldn't get out. And That's when, you know, the claustrophobic feelings come in, where you can't say stop. Can we just like take this off for a while, I need a little break, and then we'll put it. It doesn't work that way.
In 1981, the Oscars that year realized they'd made a huge mistake and that they didn't have a special effects makeup award for The Elephant Man. That would change with An American Werewolf in London, and Rick Baker would become the first person to win that Oscar.
An American Werewolf in London is the finest example of a horror comedy. I think John Landis has a very unique vision, and arguably maybe the best werewolf movie ever made. Let's just say it, let's just be real. American Werewolf in London slaps.
Directors who were coming of age in the 1970s really wanted to go back to stories of their youth and create their version of it. And when it came to Terry Gilliam and John Boorman, they went back to really the folk tales and the basis of all British mythology. John Boorman is a really fascinating filmmaker because he managed to make this movie coming off of two of his biggest flops, which were The Exorcist II and Zardoz. But he was famous for his ability to create a flop that still made money. People knew that he could be fairly ambitious and not cost them anything. So he'd been working since the 60s to create this Excalibur movie, and in spite of his box office reputation, people still trusted him.
It's amazing that John Boorman had the guts to do it, because the line between sincere Arthurian, adventure and Monty Python is very thin, and the Holy Grail had been out for a few years. But Boorman is fearless. He's not a slave to fashion. He doesn't care what other movies are doing in that period. And he makes Excalibur as a total visual tour de force.
God save us from Morgana. And save us from her unholy child.
It has its own language. It defies every convention that I've seen of like how these films are supposed to play out. And I just remember being completely in awe from start to finish of this very bizarre, very unconventional, and just very big movie.
Some people look at Excalibur and think that John Boorman was being too ambitious and maybe leaned into style over substance. The Knights of the Round Table are in the silver armor that is almost blinding. And Merlin, he kind of looks like a drag queen, and it's incredible. I think that if he leaned into style over substance, we all win.
Time Bandits, in a lot of ways, is Terry Gilliam's version of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's him returning to the kind of fairy tales and folk tales of his youth, but also the Saturday morning pictures you would go to in England. Somebody just give you a nickel and kind of drop you at the movies, and who knows what you'd see.
Time Bandits was the movie where Terry Gilliam really solidified his identity outside of Monty Python. It has all of the visual flair and the sense of atmosphere that he brought to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but it doesn't have that same kind of outrageous comedy. It's more whimsical.
Time Bandits is one of those special kids films in that it's genuinely frightening, that when you watch it, some of the kind of manic energy Terry Gilliam brings to it. As a kid, you're kind of unsettled by it, and that's why as a kid you want to go to it again and again and again.
I do think that most of the films he makes as an excuse to build the worlds and then just wander around inside, which is why they can feel meandering and plotless at the worst, but also incredibly rich and textured at their best. It's got so many ideas pouring out of it that it can't contain them all. And it's also playful and fun and antic and idiosyncratic in a way that says, yeah, if a kid had an adventure, it would probably feel exactly like this.
What really sells Time Bandits is the sweetness of our protagonist, Kevin. He's such a pure soul. He's this kid that really loves adventure and loves reading about ancient times. His parents are absolutely awful to him. And I think you're really rooting for Kevin because he's kind of found a new family.
One of the ways Time Bandits really sticks out to me is Terry Gilliam's insistence to not talk down to kids. He said that it's a film that a lot of adults find very disturbing, but those disturbing elements sort of, wash over kids. They take them in and they leave what they don't need. I remember finding the ending incredibly disturbing. It's very scary and weird, and it's kind of leaving you in this uncomfortable space. But Terry Gilliam sees the film as optimistic because by leaving a child audience member and the kid in the movie in this sort of unusual space with just a wave and a goodbye from Sean Connery, he's telling you that you can do this. You can fight evil now. It's all up to you.
You get a sense from 1981 filmmaking that the future was very bleak, and two films that really exhibit that are John Carpenter's Escape from New York and George Miller's The Road Warrior. When John Carpenter wrote Escape from New York in the mid-1970s, he's thinking about Watergate. It's a very cynical time in America. But he's also realizing that cities like New York City, which was bankrupt at the time, were crumbling.
I just love how John Carpenter creates his own very dark and dystopian fascist worlds in which to satirize fascist ideals that seem to be always cropping up in American politics at the time. He really has a lot to say about America in general in a lot of his films. They're not just dumb action movies. They really have a very pointed political message in a lot of John Carpenter's work, which I find very appealing.
The film has a real fascination with kind of looking at the seedier parts of New York, you know, underground areas, back alleyways, places that, you know, normal tourism wouldn't take you.
You also have Kurt Russell just being cranky and tired and resentful. Those are the greatest heroes. Like Indiana Jones is similarly one of those guys who'd just really rather not be doing this. That's a great role for Kurt Russell specifically, but it's fun to watch as an audience because, yeah, we've all had bad days, and this is just a bad day where you have to save the world.
I guess I go in one way or the other. Doesn't mean shit to me. Give me the paper.
When you come out?
Before.
This is Kurt Russell's iconic role, but it was very different for him in 1981. He was kind of coming off of these Disney films. He'd worked with John Carpenter before when he played Elvis for a TV movie. Snake Plissken was uniquely Kurt Russell, and it's how we think of him today.
Carpenter fought and fought for Kurt. He knew that there was something there that he could get that no one else could, and I think it's that kind of jokey nihilism. We know that that sense of humor that Snake has is very Kurt.
I always have to remind myself that The Road Warrior takes place in the mid-1990s. It's quite shocking. You can tell that Australia was realizing that ecological disaster was much closer than other countries thought.
The Road Warrior is the one where you get to have fun with the end of the world. And it's still pretty grim, it's pretty heavy, but it is a movie where you get to enjoy the fantasy of being a guy with a really fast car and a lot of guns. And the survivalist thing is over, new societies are coming up, so they get to have fun with the ideas of where Western culture is gonna go.
We went back to the present and said, well, what would happen if right now there's a massive energy crisis? There's suddenly no more fuel, there was suddenly no more power to run refrigerators and lights. I mean, what would start to happen?
A lot of the big innovations in Mad Max storytelling in The Road Warrior come from DP Dean Semler. He's somebody who started to film this massive expanse of the outback, this idea of kind of a desert wasteland where these characters live.
It begins as a siege movie and then becomes like, how long can we sustain a chase? And they basically sustain a chase for half the runtime of the movie. And it's pretty extraordinary and just such a feat of filmmaking and visual storytelling.
George Miller thought in his head that this movie was like a silent film with sound, and he really shot like that. He encouraged everyone to be bold with their camera choices, with their acting choices, and it really worked.
There's legendary stories from the set about near misses and near fatalities, none of which is really all that funny, except that all the people who made it were so proud of their efforts. They were so proud of emerging from these crashes unscathed, blowing up oil tankers, all analog gestures, embodied flesh and blood stunt work and machine work.
I think one of the big triumphs of The Road Warrior is how confident it is to let the action speak for itself. It's a real anomaly in 1981 and still today.